Sharon.
Lorena and
Chris. I can write your names down. I'm Cindy Elder. I'm the Executive Director of the Barrington Land Conservation Trust.
Victor Larish, I'm head of stewardship for the Land Trust and steward from the Land Trust for this property.
And I'm Catherine Beauchamp, and I'm the chair of the Barrington Garden Club Committee for this property and work along with the Land Trust in maintaining the property.
I'm going to just give a brief introduction, then I'm going to hand it over to our leaders, Victor and Catherine, who are the real experts here representing the Land Trust and the Garden Club, which co-manage the property with the town of Barrington. So we've been talking about Osamequin. And I think some of us who live in Barrington may know the name of the road, Massasoit, right? And a lot of people, including myself at one point in my life, thought Massasoit was the name of the person who was the leader of the Native American group in this area. Massasoit actually means great sachem. And so the person's actual name was Osamequin. And so when you say Massasoit, Osamequin, what you're saying is the great leader, the great sachem, Osamequin. He lived between 1581 and 1661, and he was the leader both of the Pokanoket people, who have a 12,000-year history in this area, but he was also the leader of the Wampanoag Confederacy of tribes in this area. And so the English colonists mistook his name for Massasoit because people called him Massasoit, being the great leader. So prior to colonization, the Pokanoket territory included what's now basically all of the East Bay and parts of Massachusetts, Seekonk, Rehoboth, Swansea. It's a pretty big territory. Here we are on the ancestral homelands of the Pokanoket people, and it's important to honor that and to recognize that and to remember that this is a living group of people, and many of them are here among us, and we honor that. So again, I'm with the Barrington Land Conservation Trust. This is one of the properties that we help to manage. We don't own this property, the town owns it, but we work with the Garden Club to manage it. However, we do own about 300 acres of land in Barrington, and that's land that's either been donated to us or that we have managed to acquire through grants and donations. And so thank you all for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to Victor and Catherine.
Sure. I'm just going to give you a brief little history. Back in early 1970s, mid-70s, the Preservation Society found out that, it was before the Wampanoag Trail was here, that they actually were going to be building the highway through this property. There was a farmhouse and farmland on this property, and one of the women from the Preservation Society purchased the farmland. Unfortunately, the farmhouse could not be saved. And then, this was when Governor Chafee was here, and he had, what was it, the Green Acres Act, where they were giving grants to town to save open spaces. So the town of Barrington used that and purchased like 31 acres. And then another 6.5 acres was purchased, and it was all given to the town of Barrington to preserve it. And that's what we have presently. We have the southern end here, and we have the northern end, which is on the other side. So the Barrington Garden Club approached the town council and asked if they could maintain the property. There was nothing here, it was farmland. So we have pictures where they're standing where that parking lot is, and there's nothing here. None of this is here. So the Garden Club started this in 1968. They got a number of grants. They got grant money to build the stone wall, and then they started planting what they thought were native species. Unfortunately, a lot of them have turned out to be invasive. But, you know, they
Live
did.
and learn, right?
They did learn, right? So they did a lot of planting out here, the larch trees that Victor will talk about. And as we're going in, you'll see everything in the open meadow, the grasses. They had a lot of help from the Boy Scouts, which built the bridges, a viewing deck to look over at ducks, etc. So a lot of grants and money was used out here, and the Garden Club has continued to maintain this property since 1968. We have a committee. I have volunteers that come out. We come out twice a month and do litter clear up, but we're also getting rid of invasive species. And in 2016, the Garden Club went to the Land Trust and asked if they could help maintain this property. So that's where the Land Trust came in. And Victor has the Tuesday Trails team, and they come out here periodically during the year with a lot of equipment that we don't have to help take down, trees, invasive species, etc.
So glad you're all here. This is one of my favorite places in town. Osamequin it's a really dynamic, living, breathing system in space, and it's a living classroom. If you come here throughout the year, and you come here over many years, you see how this place changes, and what nature will do with or without our help. But it's also a place that demonstrates a lot of things that we have to deal with today, including sea level rise, climate change, threatened species that have made a huge comeback, as we see the osprey, invasives.
So all the trails are marked. They have different colors. So we're going to start with the blue trail. The ground is a little bit muddy, but we'll take you down to an area where one of the first inlets is. First bridges that will take us over across an inlet here. This was done by Scout Troop 4. And during the big storm that we had on December 23rd of last year, it was a combination of a king high tide and high winds. We had flooding throughout the whole entire forest floor. You can see we'll be pointing out the rack lines. This actually got shifted over about 3 or 4 feet.
Catherine,
Yes.
could you explain what a rack line is?
Oh, the rack line is when the tides come in and they bring all of the debris that is in the water and that's churned up, and it's picking up phragmites and the grasses that are along here, and it just washes in, and then when the tide recedes, that is left behind, and that's called a rack line. And it's very noticeable when we take you further in where the big meadow is, and it shows you how many feet. It came up above 3 feet. So when that storm hit, the water just came rushing through here. This thing weighs an awful lot, and it actually lifted it up off the pilings and shifted it over. And the water came up an inlet that's a little bit over here. We'll walk to it, and actually washed out the bridge that was there. So we're no longer able to access the other side without going through the parking lot. And the bridge ended up in the marshes over here. So, but this isn't very pretty, but we can go through.
And the bridge that we're talking about down there, it was destined to be removed anyway because of sea level rise, and it was regularly underwater. And the salt marsh on either side was degrading and really not safe.
This is the southern side, and then the northern side's over there. And it just kept getting flooded over and over because tides are getting higher and higher. And we were having more of the king high tides, which are well above the flood stage. So the water went over the stone wall over here and went through the whole entire parking lot and into 114. And we have film of cars going by being, the splash up. They probably thought it was rainwater. It wasn't. It was salt water. So you can see we have a tide that is very, very high. We've had a number of them this week. We had another very high king tide on Tuesday. And right ahead you can see the osprey nest, and an osprey just flew in.
In terms of sea level rise, we could potentially be looking at several feet of sea level rise by the year 2100. So looking forward, it's why we abandoned this bridge, because it couldn't be maintained, and any salt marsh on either side of it, it was like walking through quicksand more and more to get to it. But potentially in the future,
That I don't know.
Route 114 is just going to it floods often enough now, but one of the things that's being considered as we look forward in time is, okay, the salt marsh is here now, it's going to get inundated, what's going to happen? Well, it might move across the road if we give it the opportunity to. And towns around the state are looking for ways to kind of, how can they modify, infrastructure to permit that to happen, because salt marsh plays such an important role in terms of buffering against sea level rise, and it's also an important nursery for critters.
Thank you, Twin Towers, appreciate it.
This black fencing along 114, that was put up for the terrapins. We have one of the largest populations of diamondback terrapins in the state. It's an endangered species, and we've worked with the Department of Transportation. There is a nesting site on the other side of 114, and this just shows you what happens when everybody comes in, land is taken over, etc. Well, the terrapin want to go to their nesting sites. So to stop them from going over 114, DOT actually put a fencing along the whole barrier, the guardrail. Well, that was falling apart. So last year they came in and they put up all this black fencing, and it starts all the way at the very, very beginning of, it's still County Road, but turns into the Wampanoag Trail, and it goes all the way up just before the radio station. And this is to prevent the terrapin. They can't go up it because it's very, very heavy, and it's wired in place, and it comes in this way, so they can't get up. So, they're turtles. They're turtles. Yep. So 100 Acre Cove is where these terrapins live. We don't advertise it because it's an endangered species, but I'm one of the leads of the Terrapin Project. And they do come up here to nest as well, and I'll show you where that's at. But this is their home.
You're saying there's currently in the center
On the other side of 114, somewhere over there, yes, there is a nesting site. And they try to go back to where they came from. And, since they've put up the fencing, we haven't seen any dead terrapin in the highway, which is a blessing. Charlotte, who ran the program for 30 years, her mother was in a nursing home. She had to be on the highway every day. And she would see terrapins. She would pull over, safely get out of her car, put them in the back of her car, and then bring them up to the nesting site, and they would nest. So she was able to save some of them. So we're going to go up what we consider the green trail. We're going to go around the bottom part of a little meadow, and we're just going to discuss a few things there, and then we're going to take you very, very close to where the ospreys are. And at that point, we'll just ask everybody to be as quiet as you can, and you'll be able to stand, and they'll be right in front of you. Okay? As we're walking around, you might be noticing these black bags. You're going to be seeing more of them. We have a lot of invasive buckthorn trees. They have wonderful berries on them, which the birds love. So the birds eat all of the the berries, and they go out and they deposit them all over the place. So we have thousands of buckthorn, which is very, very invasive. We're slowly starting to clear the areas, but these are buckthorn bags. So what we do is we cut them down and put the bags over them, and it kills, because we have to kill the root system in it. Another thing we've been doing is trying to clear so people can see the marsh. There's a lot of invasive autumn olive trees. They're all over the place. And we also have a lot of invasive non-native honeysuckle. So behind you, you will see this huge brush pile. And this is what we do, is we take all of everything that we clip and cut down, and we make these big brush piles, which are very good for birds to get into, small mammals can use it, and then eventually it's all going to break down. So now we're going to head up around the corner, and then if everybody can be quiet, we'll actually come pretty close to where the osprey nest is. And this is our smaller meadow. This is going to be all full of grasses.
The platform you're looking at over here replaced the platform that had existed years ago. And that, though it looks like it's a wooden pole, it's actually made out of composite. And we've been using these increasingly as we replace platforms. They return typically the very end of March, early April, and will you oftentimes return to the same nest, and the pairs mate for life and return every winter from spending their time down in the Caribbean or South America.
And the males go one place and the females go a different place.
Is that so?
Yes.
Okay.
And then they come back here.
Right.
And this is an amazing success story, because back in the between the 40s and the 70s, because of the use of DDT, at least in Rhode Island, 85% of active osprey nests were no longer active. The shells were too thin and they couldn't survive. When DDT was removed, when it was banned, ospreys came back. And so just within viewing, you can see 3 or 4 osprey platforms around here. There are many more for a bird act. And in terms of osprey etiquette, you really want to stay several hundred feet away from an osprey, especially if you're on the water. If they're not happy with you, they'll dive bomb you.
Right. And they have very large talons.
That lock.
Yeah.
Catherine, are you speaking from personal experience?
Yeah. No, I've gotten dive bombed by blue jays in my own yard. But what you see out here is beautiful marsh areas, but also all of the islands out there. We are losing a lot of them because of invasive crabs and snails, and they eat through the peat and break it apart. But then we've had more and more and more higher and higher tides, and when we have our king high tides, these islands are completely covered with water. So it just keeps constantly breaking it up and breaking it up. The keystone species, does everybody know what a keystone species is?
No, tell us.
Without them, what the area that they live in would be completely destroyed by invasive crabs and snails. So our keystone species here is our terrapin turtle. They are the ones that keep the population of those crabs and snails down so they don't overtake everything. This completely freezes over in the wintertime. And I was very fortunate. I was out at the refuge, and we actually saw one of the juvenile eagles that spent the winter here. They're all brown. They don't have their white head yet. And he kept going down onto the ice pack and walking around on the ice. It was kind of neat to see that. Let's see, what else do we? We've got a lot of deer out here, and the deer do swim. They swim very well, and they can swim from island to island to island and then go inland. And the one thing nice about osprey is they constantly vocalize to each other. So they're talking to each other. When they're circling overhead, they're communicating with each other where everybody is. And he might be calling his mate to come back.
You'll
All right.
see as we get to some open salt marsh.
They're very territorial, and they nest just once. They nest early. And the interesting thing is when you see their nest, they make it out of nothing but white feathers. So they go out in the marshes and get all the white feathers from the swans and all the birds that have white feathers that have dropped them. And they're very protective of their nest box. So one is right in front of the door, and they'll sit there or stand there and prevent anybody else from using the box. So they only nest once per season. At another refuge, we have bluebirds, and the swallows are more aggressive than the bluebirds. So they'll nest first, and then the bluebirds can come in, and they usually nest twice in a season. But this is our very, very large open meadow. And this shows you what happens when you don't control the surrounding forest, which you do need. It starts creeping in and creeping in and creeping in, and eventually will take over. And you need these open meadows for the swallows, for bluebirds, for the larger hawks need a larger area to fly through. And then last July, we had a fire up here. We think it was caused by a cigarette, we're not sure. People that were living on the shoreline on the other side noticed all the smoke coming up, called the fire department, and they actually had fire departments from 5 communities come. This entire meadow burned all the way to the very back. And you can see it in this picture. It shows you the blackened area. That was all burned. And it was so intense. If you look at all of these juniper trees, you can see the fire line. All of that is brown. Those don't come back. So what we're doing, there's a number of trees that we have marked that need to come down. They've become invasive. They're taking over the meadow, but all of these also need to come down because they'll never regrow again. The wood is all dead. But you can see this was all black, completely black last July. So this meadow is going to be filled with blue stem grass. It's really beautiful. And it gets to be about this high. And then once all of the grasses come out, the swallows can still fly above. Oh, there we go. That's an osprey. The swallows can still get all the bugs above. They eat all the flying insects, including a lot of mosquitoes, which is good.
What are these birds with the little blue?
The iridescent, they're tree swallows.
Those are
Right, and they're very, very aerodynamic. They have sharp wings, and then they have a tail that splits in the back. And they'll swoop down and swoop all around, grabbing insects.
Are they migratory or just?
Yeah, they'll come back. Oh, they spend the whole spring and summer and part of the fall, and then they leave. Because then they don't have anything to eat. They eat nothing but bugs. That's it.
And all of these nest boxes are monitored by
Somebody cleans them out. Right?
Jerry.
Jerry does.
Does it?
Yeah,
He,
Jerry takes
cleans
care
them
of all
out, and
these.
they're left open during the winter.
That's beautiful.
Aren't they beautiful? Very iridescent.
We haven't seen bluebirds nesting here, but there certainly are bluebirds elsewhere in town.
Yeah.
Now that stuff right in the back, is that growing or is that left over from the?
The twigs.
With the twigs.
Yeah, that's
Oh, look at the
sumac.
twigs. Look at these guys. Oh, yeah.
Oh, look at this. Look.
That's the one that's rebuilt in the nest. It's a fixer-upper. It's a fixer-upper, the nest of the ground.
It's all cut
It really
sumac.
is. I mean, it came
It's gonna grow back.
No,
No.
this is a flowering sumac, which has it's either yellow or red flowerets on the top of it. And if you see that when it's in bloom, it is covered with all kinds of bees, hundreds of different bees. So it actually is a good. We have a little bit too much out here, but it's really good for nature. Butterflies and bees love it.
And Catherine, are they usually this active this time of year out here, or is this more clearing for them, or
What?
the birds? Yeah.
Oh no, you're just seeing them now because there's nothing here. But if when all of the grasses have come in, they fly above the grasses and get all the insects. Yeah. And last year, because of the drought, junipers usually have these really pretty blue berries on them, and sumac have the pretty flowers. There were none. Everybody was conserving their energy because they didn't have enough to produce their fruit. So hopefully this year we'll have a little bit more rain. So let's continue. A trail closure sign down here. There was another one when we came around the corner and you first saw the osprey. There was another one there. At one point we actually were able to walk that trail from there to here. We can't do it anymore because the shoreline's gone. So that whole pathway is already gone. And that has been, what, over the last 8 years, 10 years? So this is what's happening. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's one. And whenever we're doing cleanup, we like to make islands under the trees, make sure that we get all the growth out from underneath here, and then we take it and we put it all in a pile. That just helps. All right, so we're going to walk over here. What you're going to see is you're going to see the peat, the bottom of where underneath where all the grasses are. And this is being invaded. When Victor and I were down here earlier in the week, there were just hundreds and hundreds of crabs. And they're the ones, one has one large crab, one large claw and a small claw, and everywhere you look there was nothing but crabs. And so they're burrowing inside this peat and making all these holes. And then the tides come in and wash it and wash it and wash it, and then it just starts disintegrating and falling apart. And at low tide, when it's really low, you can actually, there are stones, and you could walk to this island over here very easily.
You have this is riddled. This isn't bad, but you see all these holes. Those are all crabs.
Wow.
And Catherine may have said when we were here previously, you can see them marching all over the place down here.
What kind of crab is it?
These are mainly fiddler crabs. They're about that large.
Oh, little.
We also have purple marsh crabs here, and they're a cause. If you were to look at the edge, you can see holes. It's pockmarked, and that's crab activity. And then they eat the roots of salt marsh plants. And then with wave action and higher tides, it just breaks apart and falls into the water.
And what's the other shell? It looks like a clam or whatever, like the shellfish shells I see.
These look like soft shell clams.
What are those?
Soft shell clam.
Clams. Okay, because I see those on my property too sometimes.
I think these are soft shell clams, but you'll see quahogs out here. You'll see oysters.
Oh, so you can actually go digging for oysters and crabs or something?
Well, and actually blue crabs in the summer.
Really? That's Maryland crab.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was wondering the fishing habits around here. Like the people.
You get a lot of fishermen out here.
They often wade out here.
Okay, yep.
Well,
What we're going to do is we're going to walk through a trail to Walker's Farm. And on the right, we're going to pass where all of the yard recycling waste is put by the town of Barrington. They bring it all down here, and they make these huge columns, all of your leaves and trees, etc. And the interesting thing is the ducks nest on the top of these because they're nice and warm. All the heat's coming up, so the ducks nest on top of them. I found that out from one of the workers out here.
I'm assuming that we're
We're going to see what looks really messy because the undergrowth hasn't been cleared. This is multifloral roses that is so invasive and very, very hard to get rid of. But the undergrowth is good for everybody, and old growth is good, and down trees can be used by a lot of animals, and leaving the dead trees up are used by a lot of birds to, make their nests. So everything's important. The only thing we keep clear is the pathway. This is a very interesting place. At one time there was a pig farm out here, and the restaurants used to come in and bring all their kitchen waste in and dump it. And along with all that kitchen waste, it also included dishes and silverware. And there's some instances there you can actually see some pieces over here.
right over there.
We find them along the shoreline. And then also the fishermen were coming in here, and were allowed to dump all of their oyster shells. So it's been done for a very long time. As you can see, this tree has been uprooted for a while, but you can see deep in the roots all the oysters. So all those oyster shells have been in there. So they did that at one time. They don't do that anymore. But it's just a kind of an interesting. One time I came out here walking and I was finding all these bones. And at first I thought it really looked like a thigh bone. I thought, oh my God, has somebody been killed? And they left the body out here. But then I started really looking at them and realizing they were too thick. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a coyote. And they were, sawed through. So, slaughtering the pigs. And the bones are very, very, very old. Very old. Probably about 60, 70 years old or what.
Walker's Farm area.
It's one of the bones. And you can see that it's cleanly shaved through. Oh, that's pretty big.
It's a good time to be here. What you're looking at, anybody recognize these trees? You don't see a lot of them around here. Now, they are native to New England, but these are tamaracks or larch trees.
What are
Tamarack or larch,
LARCA?
L-A-R-C-H. And it's a conifer, and you'll find...
It's an odd growth pattern.
Well, it's an odd growth pattern, and it loses its needles in the fall. And it
It's
turns...
it's a conifer?
It's a conifer,
That loses its
but it
Yes.
loses its needles in the fall. These are their their cones.
These are the cones
And
that grow on them.
they
And then the little green that's growing now is new
that is
growth.
all new growth.
Yep.
If you came here 2-3 weeks ago, there was no green. And they're beautiful trees. Interestingly, these trees were planted by the Garden Club back in the 70s. So they've done quite well. Well, we don't quite understand. We have some ideas, but we don't understand why they have not propagated themselves. We think partly it's the understory, what's growing here. And occasionally you'll find some, young seedlings, but not many, given the number of cones that drop
Right.
onto the floor.
Right.
So one of our missions, we hope, going forward is what can we do to get these to spread, or maybe transplant seedlings elsewhere. These are, these are from the 70s. They were not here before that. And tamarack in Algonquin meant wood that would be used for snowshoes. So they would make snowshoes out of tamarack or larch wood. And another little factoid is, I guess early settlers, when they would clear these, they would cut them fairly low, and then they would, I guess, pull the stumps, and they would take the stumps and they use part of the stump for, how they have what are called knees in ships, which are curved pieces
Yeah.
of wood, which in more modern days would be steamed to
Right.
curve things. There would be natural knee formations within the wood, and they could carve them out of the tamarack stumps.
Yeah.
But they're a beautiful tree. I mean, we don't have a lot of greenery on the lower parts of the trees, probably because they're fairly crowded.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many were originally planted here. It would be interesting to find out, and then take account of what's here now. So
Stay and chat with Dave about the Heritage Area again and those who need to carry on.